I have a bachelor's degree in an engineering discipline in which I graduated magna cum laude, 3.7 GPA, and I have a master's degree in computer science from one of the top ranked universities in the United States. And let me tell you, all that hard work and all the thousands of hours I spent studying and working on assignments, perfecting my resume, working on side projects to make my resume more appealing, practicing interview questions, none of that was worth it. All that hard work did not pay off. By the time I got the computer science degree, the job market was already pretty much cooked. But back when I graduated with the engineering degree, the economy was doing pretty well. And it seemed like all my classmates were getting multiple job offers, usually from big companies too. Companies most people have heard of. And a lot of people were getting offers months before graduating. But I only ended up getting one single offer, and I didn't even get that offer until after I graduated. And even then, I'm pretty sure I only got that job out of sheer luck. They actually hired someone else, and that person just didn't show up for work. They just ghosted the company, so it was only after that that they even called me in for an interview. I did have a few interviews before that with other companies, and I think at least one of those interviews actually went pretty well, but no luck. Here's the thing, too. None of these companies that I interviewed for that rejected me, none of these companies actually called me to tell me I didn't get the job. They just let me figure that out for myself. So, what was the difference between me and everyone else I graduated with that they were all able to find high-paying jobs, usually with multiple offers, while I just barely managed to get one below-average job offer? Well, what I've learned over the years is that working hard, generally speaking, is a waste of time. That's not how you get a job. Your qualifications are not really all that important outside of, you do need to meet the basic requirements for certain jobs. You're not going to get hired as a chemical engineer, for example, if you don't have an engineering degree. But outside of meeting the basic requirements, having an outstanding GPA or having interesting personal projects on your resume, that's not going to do much for you. There's a few reasons I understand now why I struggled so much to find a job compared to my peers, and most of it was things that are outside my control. You can say I'm just making excuses. I'm just a whiny little crybaby that can't accept personal responsibility for my own shortcomings. But truly, there are reasons outside my control that made it extra difficult for me to find employment. But before I get into those reasons, I want to talk about something that is potentially under my own control. Okay, so I admit it is at least a little bit my own fault. So we'll start there, and then I'll get into all the other bigger reasons why nobody wants to hire me. So let's do it like this. I'm going to tell you about an interview I had where I just completely fucked it up. And I'm curious to see how many of y'all can figure out what the problem was just from hearing the story. So, this was an interview I got invited to after I applied through my university's job board. It was for a large corporation. They have over 10,000 employees all across the US, and I think in other countries too. It was actually the only large corporation like that that I ever interviewed with. All the other companies that let me interview were all smaller local companies. But anyways, the way it worked, they were interviewing maybe 10 to 15 different people, including me, and they were doing the interview on campus. So I had to go to this building on campus, and then they led me to this room that was basically like a boardroom. It was just a big table in there, and all the other people that were interviewing were in there too, and we're all sitting around the table. Then this guy from the company walks in, and he basically gave us a PowerPoint presentation about the company. Then he asked if anyone had any questions. So a few people asked questions, he was also asking us questions throughout the presentation, basically quizzing us on random things. But, anyways, I didn't answer any questions and I didn't ask any questions. The whole presentation was pretty much useless. He wasn't saying anything about the particular job that we were all there for. It was just basic information about the company, like the company history and that kind of thing. So then after the presentation, they had us all sit there and wait in the boardroom while they called each of us individually to go into a different room for one-on-one interviews. I think they had 3 different interviewers there doing interviews simultaneously in different rooms. So it didn't take all day, but I did have to wait about an hour for my individual interview, which, that is a bit too long if you ask me. Kinda disrespectful of my time as a busy college student, but I did have all my school stuff with me since the interview was on campus, so I just studied or worked on assignments or whatever, so, no big deal. And by the way, they were looking to hire multiple people. I don't know how many exactly, but definitely more than one. I'm pretty sure it was actually at least 10 people they ended up hiring. I don't know how many they interviewed in total because it wasn't just all the people that were there on the day I went. They did interviews on other days as well. But yeah, when I got called in for my individual interview, I was interviewing with the same guy that gave the presentation. The vast majority of the interview was behavioral questions. Questions like, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker and how you dealt with that. Or describe a time when you were faced with a significant challenge and talk about how you overcame that challenge. A bunch of BS like that, which I actually don't think I did too bad at. I had had another interview not too long before that where I wasn't prepared for all the behavioral questions. And I remember one thing they asked me, I just couldn't think of a good response. So I was just sitting there not saying anything for a while. Then eventually I asked them to repeat the question because I was trying to stall. Then after I was just sitting there silent for a few seconds, I just said, I don't know, which pretty much means I just failed the interview on the spot. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but I remember it was some BS behavioral question. They wanted me to describe a time when blah, blah, blah happened and how I overcame it or whatever. But it was a situation I had never experienced, so I just didn't know what to say. But obviously, you should never just say, I don't know, to a question like that. But that's what I did, and, it was embarrassing. But anyways, because of that experience, I prepared really well for this interview. So I had answers memorized for all the common behavioral questions they could potentially ask. And I also had a plan that ended up working really well, I think, where so I had memorized responses to maybe 10 different behavioral questions. So my plan was, if they ask one of these bullshit behavioral questions that I didn't prepare for, I'll just be like, well, I've never experienced that exact situation, but I did have a time where blah, 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 then I would just answer with one of my prepared responses to a different question. So I actually did that at least once during the interview, and it seemed to work pretty well. So I think I actually did better in this interview overall than any other interview I've ever had. It was probably the only time I was ever actually really prepared for all the behavioral questions. And I remember one thing the guy asked me. He asked me, how many laws of thermodynamics are there? Which is kind of a trick question. I got it right. There's 4 laws of thermodynamics. But the reason it's kind of a trick question is because the way the laws are named, there's the first law of thermodynamics, the second law, and the third law of thermodynamics. Then the other one is called the 0th law of thermodynamics. I don't know why they're named like that, but just what a useless question. He didn't even ask me what any of the laws were. He just asked how many there are. And I said 4. And he was like, oh, very good. A lot of people don't get that one. And I'm just thinking, so what? Like, it's such a pointless trivia question. It's like, are you trying to hire engineers or are you trying to find contestants for Jeopardy? But, anyways, I think I did pretty well during the interview. But then at the end of the interview, the guy reached out to shake hands and I grabbed his hand, but he was still talking while shaking hands. So I think that kind of distracted me. Plus, I was already halfway having a panic attack the whole time just because of how much social anxiety I have. So I remember all of a sudden I realized, oh shit, I am totally dead fishing this guy. I wasn't actually gripping his hand. He was shaking my hand, but my hand was basically limp. So when I realized that, I just thought like, oh shit. And so I immediately gripped his hand, trying to turn it into an actual decent, firm handshake. But I gripped way too hard. And as soon as I did that, I could see the look on this guy's face. Like, he was just so confused about what I was doing. He looked like he had a sudden rush of adrenaline from it. Like, he looked shocked how I gripped his hand all of a sudden. But I also was, at the same time I gripped his hand, I was saying, like, thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to hearing from you, blah, 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 whatever. So he was just like, yeah, thanks, bye, whatever he said. So he didn't actually say anything about me gripping his hand too hard, I think, because I distracted him when I started talking. But I'll never forget the look on his face. He looked so confused and surprised, as if I had just done something completely beyond the pale. I'm pretty sure I spiked this guy's cortisol, or whatever the kids are saying these days. But anyways, I don't think that's why I didn't get the job, although it did probably contribute. Like I said, the interview went pretty well for the most part. I think I had solid answers for everything he asked, and I even asked a couple follow-up questions at the end. But here's the thing. The whole time I was there, even though I was able to give good responses to all his questions, I'm pretty sure I was visibly nervous the entire time. My voice was quivering. I probably had sweat stains on my shirt before we even sat down, because I just have anxiety like that. I don't think there's really anything I could do to come off confident in a high pressure situation like a job interview. I'm always going to be a nervous wreck. It's just how it is. That's just who I am. But what I think it was that really sealed my fate, the more I think about it, it had to be because of when they had us all in the one room together and the guy was asking questions and then he opened the floor for us to ask questions. I think it was roughly half of the people there that either asked a question or at least spoke up and participated in the discussion. But I just sat there, partly because I couldn't think of anything to ask, but mostly because I am deathly afraid of speaking up in a group situation. One-on-one, my anxiety is, it's not good, but it is a lot more manageable. But speaking up in a group it is technically under my control, but it feels impossible. So I just sat there. I wasn't the only one. Some of the other people didn't say anything either. But I'd be willing to bet those people also didn't get hired. Because thinking about it, the presentation was completely useless. I'm pretty sure they were just testing us to weed out all the introverts and the socially inept losers such as myself. I honestly think that's the main reason I didn't get the job. I wasn't extroverted enough. But it could have been something else. I mean, at least they let me interview. The biggest difference between me and a lot of my classmates was I always struggled to even get interviews. I know some of my classmates were booking interviews left and right, and I had a good resume. I probably didn't have as good of internship experience as most people. A lot of my more successful classmates, they had multiple internships over the years with prestigious companies. I had one internship I did, but it was at a smaller company and it wasn't even technically an internship. They just called it that. In reality, I was working maintenance in a factory, which actually wasn't terrible experience. I did learn how to weld and I learned how to use a milling machine and a lathe and a few other things. So it wasn't useless, I wouldn't say. And I think I did present it well enough on my resume that it probably looked like a legitimate internship on paper. But let me tell you the reason why hardly anybody wanted to give me a shot. Basically, what it all boils down to is I didn't fit the demographic profile of who companies are looking to hire. And I don't even mean that in the way you're probably thinking. See, by the time I graduated college, I was already 26 years old, I think. I wasn't a traditional student. I was a bit older and I had been doing school only part-time for most of my degree because I was also working pretty much full-time at first, working at the burger slop factory. That's part of the reason it was harder for me to find internships because a lot of internships will only even consider you if you're a full-time student. And I also had to start off in remedial math classes. Most engineering students already have calculus credits or at least pre-calculus credits from high school. I didn't do shit in high school except smoke weed and sit in my room browsing internet forums. So when I got to college, I had to take basically 2 years worth of remedial classes to even meet the prerequisites for calculus. And calculus is a prerequisite for pretty much every engineering class. So it took me a long time to get my degree. There were other factors at play too that I'm not going to get into in this video. There are certain things I'll probably never talk about on this channel because it's just too oddly specific to my life. I'm afraid someone might recognize me. But yeah, I was an older than the typical student, which shouldn't matter at all when you're applying to jobs online. It's not like I had my age on my resume, but I'm pretty sure they Google that shit. These companies aren't inviting anyone to an interview without looking them up on social media. And as soon as they would see my photo on LinkedIn, that's all she wrote. Because I don't even look my age. I've always looked old for my age. So at say 25 or 26, when I was applying to a lot of these jobs in preparation for graduating, I easily could have passed for 35 or maybe even 40 something. I already had a lot of gray hair in my beard by then. So I do think that was a factor. And just to remind you the main topic of this video, my experiences through getting this degree, and even later on with my master's degree, it was even further confirmed. What I learned was that working hard is pointless. Having good grades is not how you get a good job. You get a good job by knowing the right people or by being a member of a certain sought-after demographic. More on that in just a minute. Or you get a job by having good social skills or being good-looking. Because looks and personality are heavily correlated, confidence is a big factor in having a quote-unquote good personality, and most guys aren't going to be very confident if they don't have good looks. In a lot of ways, your looks determines your social skills and your personality. Not entirely. There are ugly dudes out there, I'm sure, that still have great social skills, and there's good-looking guys with poor social skills. But of course, because of the halo effect, if you're good-looking, then you're going to be perceived as having strong social skills, even if you really don't. But actually building job-relevant skills and knowledge and making good grades, that doesn't really help all that much. I remember this one guy that was in one of my group projects. By the way, pretty much everyone I ever talked to in college, it was because we were in a group project together. I don't know if every degree is like this, but in my degree, probably about half the classes would have at least one group project. But anyways, this one guy I met, he was an American-born Japanese guy, and he was pretty much an extreme extrovert, really strong social skills. he was basically the opposite of every Asian stereotype. He was super outgoing and he had really good social skills, but he wasn't very studious at all. He didn't help that much with the project we were working on, although he did do most of the presentation, so to me, that's a fair trade-off. But we were talking about internships amongst our group one day, and he was saying he had an internship every year since freshman year, and he was even doing a co-op at the time I knew him, which is basically just an internship during the semester. But he was saying how his GPA was only 2 point something. I want to say 2.7, but I don't really remember. I just remember it was bad. Meanwhile, I was steady applying to every internship and co-op job posting I came across, and I was having no luck whatsoever. But I had a good GPA, as well as some good projects on my resume. I'm pretty sure on paper, my resume was probably a lot better than his. So, how was he getting all these internships when I could hardly even get a call back for an interview? Well, either this guy was just luckier than me, or what it probably was he had some connections to some places because he's extremely extroverted and he knows a lot of people. And then I'm sure every interview he made it to was a slam dunk because he was just so good at talking. I know this is just a one-off anecdote, but seriously, social skills and looks are more important than your grades. Period. I mentioned this other guy from my physics lab in a recent video. I'm not going to repeat the whole thing here since I already talked about it, but this guy was really good looking, and that was enough for him to land a co-op at a highly sought-after company. But he was so bad at school, he ended up having to change his major. But that didn't matter because the company just moved him to a different position after he changed his major. I can't stress enough, getting a job for a man is exactly the same as getting a girlfriend. All the same qualities that are most important in attracting women are the same exact qualities that employers value. But it is a little different for women, especially in STEM fields like engineering. I'm pretty sure if you're a female in any engineering discipline, you can get a good job without even trying. You could literally have the lowest possible GPA you're allowed to graduate with, and you could even have spelling errors and shit all over your resume, and companies would still have a frickin' bidding war over you. That's how easy it is. I'll never forget this one career fair I went to. It was specifically an engineering career fair. So, I showed up in my suit and tie with a stack of resumes, ready to put my best foot forward to try to land a job. No luck at that particular career fair for me. But I saw this one girl there that I didn't actually know her, but she sat in front of me in one of my classes, and I would always hear her talking to her friends before class. But I saw this girl there, and she wasn't even dressed formal at all. Like, not only was she not wearing a suit, which, by the way, literally everyone else there was wearing a suit. Everyone except for this one girl. But not only was she not wearing a suit, she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. By the way, she was not particularly attractive. She wasn't ugly or anything, but, she was pretty much just perfectly average. And here's the craziest part. She had a cheek piercing. I don't even know what the official word is for a piercing like that, but she had a stud in her cheek, like right in the middle of her cheek. I think she also had a nose ring, but that wouldn't even surprise me. Nose rings are pretty much a given at this point. So this girl goes to the career fair wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a freaking very unusual facial piercing. And the thing is, a week or two after that, I'm sitting in class and her and her friends were talking, and she was saying how she had 2 interviews scheduled with companies she applied to at the career fair. Now, look, personally, I don't think you should have to wear a suit to get a job. Even the weird facial piercing, I don't really care. if somebody has a good resume and they seem like they'd be good for the job, then that's all that should matter. But do you think that if a man showed up to the career fair in jeans and a t-shirt with a very non-standard facial piercing, can you honestly tell me that man would have any chance of landing an interview? There's absolutely no way. I already know some of you are going to be like, well, you don't know that. Maybe a man could have worn the same exact outfit and he could have landed interviews with the same exact companies. How would you know? And yeah, sure, I have no way of knowing 100% that her sex had anything to do with it, but, it's basic pattern recognition. Every female I went to college with ended up getting hired at a big corporation, and they all had multiple internships before graduating. A lot of guys I met were successful as well, but every female was that successful. You're never going to convince me that a man could walk up into the career fair with a fucking extra alternative facial piercing and still walk away with 2 interviews. There is no way that would happen. But being female in engineering pretty much gives you a free job pass. And that's just a fact. You will never find a woman with a STEM degree struggling to find employment in her field unless there's some kind of serious mitigating circumstances, like she was in a viral video saying the N-word or something like that. Outside of extreme circumstances like that, they really are just handing out STEM jobs to any woman that meets the basic qualifications. And you can quote me on that. Bury your head in the sand if that's what you want to do, but that is a fact. Okay, I'm just going to insert this somewhere. After I got done recording, I decided to look up this one girl I worked with on a big group project in my Intro to Engineering class, because this girl was literally useless. She did not contribute to the project whatsoever. She would say she was going to do something, then she just wouldn't do it. And she also skipped several group meetings without even telling anyone. Everybody else in the group hated her. And this isn't me being misogynistic, okay? There was another girl in that group, and she actually did a good job. In fact, that girl landed an incredible internship that I could only dream of interviewing for. But I didn't mention her in this video because she was actually competent. So she deserved that job as much as anybody. But anyways, I figured, if there's any female that might struggle to find work in engineering, then it would be this useless girl from my group project back in the day, because she seriously had zero work ethic, like negative work ethic. I actually suspected she probably eventually changed majors because she didn't seem like the type of person that would be able to stick it out. But I just looked her up, and I guess she did manage to graduate. And not only that, it looks like she actually landed a really good job. I wish I could link the article, but it would be doxing the school I went to, so I don't want to do that. But there's an article on the company website for the place she works at that pops up when I searched her name along with the school I went to. It's an article for Engineer of the Week, and it's a little interview with her. And this is from a few years ago, by the way, but I just found it right now. Guys, this shit is actually not okay. I mean, I guess it's possible that she eventually buckled down and got her shit together, but I kind of doubt it. She was truly, and I mean, just with every fiber of my being, I cannot stress enough, she was truly a bad student and just the worst possible person to have on your team for a group project. When I say she did not contribute, I mean, she literally did not contribute at all to the project. Like, she did nothing. And this was a semester-long project. It was a really big, for me, very time-consuming project because I worked very hard on it. And yeah, sure, this was more than 10 years ago, but still, there's no possible way this girl is good at her job. Zero chance. Zero. But she is a woman. She also gets extra points too, I guess, because she's a black woman. But I wish I didn't even look her up. Such bullshit. I don't know why I'm even bothering to record this, but just imagine seeing the laziest, most useless person you've ever met being honored for how great they are at their job. Because that's what the fuck I'm looking at right now. And just, what a remarkable world we are living in. Just, whatever. Working hard in college and after college, working hard in your career, whatever it may be, that's not the way to get ahead. If you want to be successful, you need to have connections, or be good looking, or have good social skills, or the best way to be successful these days is to be a woman. Not that any of these things are things that you can do much to change. Of course, this is only if we're talking about traditional careers. You could potentially make good money online doing YouTube or, I don't know, just some other kind of business online where social skills and looks don't necessarily come into play. But even then, it'll still be an uphill battle. If I could go back in time, I never would have gone to college because it was a lot of hard work. Not just all the classes, all the studying and taking the exams. It's not just that, but it was a lot of hard work just doing interview prep, applying to all the jobs and everything. And in the end, it really wasn't worth it. Yeah, I got one good job. I had a decent job. But honestly, that was just luck. I mean, I guess you could say, yeah, I only was able to capitalize on that luck because of the fact that I got the degree and that put me in that situation. But, I just don't think it's worth it. I just don't think it's worth it to work hard when you don't get rewarded for it. You just don't. If anything I said here resonates with you, or if you just found it retarded but intriguing nonetheless, please consider watching some of my other videos. There's also some secret videos you can watch for free on my Patreon, videos YouTube doesn't want you to see. No sign up required, so check it out. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.